My name is Elisa Moed, and I'm the founder and CEO of Traveluia. We're based in Israel. I've been here 15 years. Our time now is 8 o'clock, and it is Sunday. And really appreciate you all taking the time to join today. We have a special program. I'm going to introduce Hana in just a minute, though I know several of you have heard her before. She's been with us a couple other times on different sessions. So this is very exciting because she's always extremely popular and has a lot to say and a lot to give. Just briefly, in Israel this week, we are approaching, let's see now, about 5.5 million people have been vaccinated. We're actually kind of slowing down because what's happening is that we have some populations that are not as eager to be vaccinated. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen so we can have more people amongst religious communities and also in some of the Arab communities that are a little bit more cautious about being vaccinated. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with just proper education and getting the word out about how safe this is. And it's, obviously we believe at least for adults, it's more dangerous not to be vaccinated than to be vaccinated. I know that amongst the Jewish community, there's a lot of the vaccine rate is much higher than among the Muslim community, Arab community. So, but we are seeing that change, and the numbers are, obviously slowly ticking up. So we're happy about that, and we understand that even children over the next hopefully month or two will be given a go-ahead to get vaccinated. So we are, coming out. I have to say, I went to my very first restaurant. I think I told some of you last week I was going to go last Friday, and honestly, it was as if Corona never even happened. I mean, we walked in, we were asked to show our little green passes, and then we just sat down and ordered, and it was pretty amazing. I mean, I guess they could have served me anything and I would have liked it, but it was especially nice, first time in really a year that we've been in a restaurant. And we also went to a wedding too. The same thing, only people who were vaccinated were allowed to attend. So that is definitely a step forward. And I hear from other people that they're, obviously moving around the country very freely. And we believe that this is going to continue to increase. Our airport has opened to up to 3,000 people coming and going. And I guess the word is that after Passover, we'll see how our numbers are, and maybe that will change. Israel is apparently in the process of negotiating with certain countries to allow people to come in, people who are fully vaccinated. Again, no date, but we think that this will start to get rolled out once the Passover holiday is behind us. And obviously I'll keep you all up to date because I know many of you are hoping to start to plan Holy Land tours. So that's basically what's going on in Israel. I want to share with you, before we begin with Hana, I want to share with you a very special site that I visited this week that was absolutely brand new for me. Not sure if either Hana or Itamar have been there, but I'm going to share my screen and just show you a bit about this, this really interesting site. And it is up in the Golan Heights. It is called Susita. And I'm not sure if anybody.
I was there a couple of months ago. It's amazing, amazing.
Was that your first time?
Actually, I was there, I think, 12 years ago, and then I went again like in summer. No, in autumn. It's too hot in the summer.
Right. So I had also heard about this site, and as many of you know, recently, about 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago, we moved up to the Galilee. And as always, it's one of my passions is to go check out new sites and see what would work for private tours and group tours. And I had heard about this site, but honestly, I had never seen it on an itinerary. I was always very curious, and I know, and I think some of you could agree that who've been on my tours know that even though it's not on anybody else's itinerary, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be on a program. And you may just, and I always like to put new things on that I think are very worthwhile. And this was a fascinating site. So I just want to show you a little bit and tell you a little bit about it. Itamar and Hana, feel free to chime in if I'm wrong about something.
Yeah, I'll just say that basically it's the Roman city of Hippos. And they had some serious work. The Nature and Parks Authority and the Authority of Antiquities had some serious work going on over there. It was not very accessible either.
So I'm going to show, I'm going to show you. For those of you who are familiar with Ein Gev, when you're driving around the lake, the Sea of Galilee, you get to Ein Gev, and basically you take a kind of like a serpentine road up the mountain. At the bottom, before you take up this little road, there's a big sign that says, like, basically as if there's no thoroughfare. And my daughters were in the back of the car saying, "Why are we going up here, Mommy? It doesn't say that you can pass." I'm like, I see other cars, and it was on the, it's then written about. I'm sure there's a way to get up there. So you zigzag up this mountain, and you get to the top, and all of a sudden, out of basically nowhere, there's no entry gate, there's no parking lot, it's just a sign, and there's a lot of barbed wire. And we pulled over, and funny enough, you don't see any cars as you're driving up, but you get to the top and you see another 7 or 8. So we parked along the side of the road. This is what we saw. And basically, Susita was founded in the 2nd century BCE. Evidence shows some prehistoric habitation. It sits on the spur of a mountain. You can kind of see that in the background. And it's surrounded by 3 sides by basically by riverbeds. And it was obviously a safe location to build. And apparently it had walls. It started when it started in the 2nd century BCE. And so most of the residents were Christians when it was at its peak, and it may have even held up to 8 churches. It also had a small Jewish community. So I'm going to just show you a few pictures. Here you see this is the path as we're walking up. There's obviously the springtime, the flowers are beautiful, but you do have a view of the Sea of Galilee, and you just have it's a stone path. You have to be kind of careful. It's very narrow. It takes you up to the top of this mountain. The ruins today mostly date between the 1st century BCE to the 749 CE, in which year an earthquake destroyed the city. Here, you can kind of see, this is where we're getting on the left-hand side to the top of the path. And what you see here on the right is basically a bunker from the 48 or 47 war, 6-day war between Israel and Syria. And it's, you can see it's kind of like a makeshift, very, not a fancy bunker by any stretch. And you can see it's somewhat of a steep drop. And that's my husband over there on the left. Here, as you get to the top, you see.
Lisa, there is some noise coming from you.
You see an amazing Roman era, colonnaded street, stretches out. It goes out for about a half a kilometer. And in the far distance, obviously, the Sea of Galilee. It is past many different reliefs and colonnades, giving you the sense that it must have been a pretty affluent city. And you can see how the blocks all fit together really, really well. And this road goes all the way out to the kind of the spur of this mountaintop. So wandering through, you can see some of these columns on the side of the road. Again, none of the buildings had any description, so I can't really tell you what was what, but I could guess what was, maybe a synagogue and what, not a synagogue, but basically churches. And there are different reliefs that you see here. So this kind of gives you the sense with this kind of decoration, it probably was pretty affluent and pretty significant. And here, what you see here is the entrance to really looks like a water system, an underground water system. And apparently there was an aqueduct that brought water from the Golan Heights, and it kind of moved up the hill using some sort of a pressure system, which was pretty sophisticated. Here, you just basically see the view as you're looking northeast from the site. Obviously, just tremendous. You've got the sea on one side, you've got the Golan, on the other side, then it's, just a beautiful and really a pretty extraordinary site. So I just wanted to share that with you. I would gladly take a group that can walk because you've got stones. As Itamar said, the Parks Authority is working right now to develop the site. In fact, they're opening up 4 other sites this month in Israel, which is pretty exciting, and we'll kind of review those in the weeks to come. But this site looks like it still has a ways to go until it's pretty developed, but But right now it's still quite extraordinary, and there's an immense amount of ruins to look at there. So that's Susita in the Golan Heights. And as I mentioned, it overlooks En-Gev. And yeah, you might want to think about that in your next trip. So I'm going to move over to Hana Bendikowski. Hana is an educator, an amazing educator, a mother, lives in Jerusalem, she has children, and she teaches at the Rossing Center for Jewish-Christian Relations and the Jerusalem Studies Center for Jewish-Christian Relations, for dialogue, right? And at the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations. So I am going to she's going to be speaking tonight and talking to us about Christians in the Holy Land, which I think, given that Easter is just around the corner, we're in the midst of Lent and all these different denominations are marking the holiday, differently, it's perfect time to learn about what is happening here within these communities. So I'm going to stop sharing and bring this over to Hana. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon, good evening for those who are in Israel. It's great to be with you again. I see some familiar faces from the former presentation I gave. And I was asked to talk a little bit about the Christian communities in the Holy Land. And I'll do that with pleasure, but we're actually going to do a virtual tour. So we're going to walk through the old city and we're going to visit some of the sites. If you have questions in the middle, either I will stop once in a while for questions, or if you have questions, please feel free to stop me and ask. We'll see. By the end, there will be a quiz. And if you pass the test, then you can come. No, I'm joking. There'll be a lot of information as always. So that's fine. You don't have to remember everything. And I'm just to remind you, so I'm working for the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. And the Rossing Center was established 15 years ago under a different name, under the name, the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations. In the beginning, it was established as an organization that focuses on dialogue between Christian and Jews in the special context of the Holy Land. But since the founder passed away and we expanded the organization, we changed its name as well. So now it's named after the founder. So Daniel Rossing was the founder, and we have many different projects now relating to Jewish-Christian-Muslim relations, racism, all kind of educational and dialogue programs, but I'm still responsible for the JCJCR, the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations. And most of my work is educational work. I educate and I teach about Christians and Christianity in the Holy Land, Jewish-Christian relations in the Israeli context. And sometimes I even teach Judaism to Christian groups. And as I said, what we're going to do now is kind of a little tour in the old city and explore the different Christian communities. When we talk about Christian communities in the Holy Land, we not necessarily talk about just Catholic and Protestant. These are the Western churches, but we'll talk a lot about the Eastern churches, since I assume that most of you come from Western backgrounds, so Western Christians, Protestants or Catholic, and the Eastern churches are less familiar to you, so I will try to emphasize more on them. So you see the group of people standing in front of the closed doors of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and by the end of my presentation, you will be able to identify who belong to which community just by the dress code. Of course, when we walk through the city, we cannot recognize lay people because they have no special outfit, maybe except for the cross that they're wearing. But when we walk in the streets of Jerusalem, you see many members of the clergy, and the clergy have special uniforms. So I can actually walk through the city and recognize if someone belongs to this or that community. And these are the pictures I'm going to show you of clergy, because lay people just dress like everyone else. So we will start our tour not with Jaffa Gate. When usually you come to the old city, you go to Jaffa Gate, but we will start with the new gate. The new gate is actually new. Before we enter the new gate, let's have a look at the map. The map of the old city and the streets of the old city are very similar to the streets of the city almost 2,000 years ago. Actually, the last time that someone planned the city properly was the Roman Emperor Adrian in the 2nd century. And basically today, we're still using the same streets that were made by the Romans in order to divide the city into 4 quarters. Yeah, so the corridor, the main street, the marketplace, the old marketplace, still part of it is a marketplace, but then we have the Christian, the Muslim, and the Jewish Armenian quarters. So these are 4 quarters, and they're divided by these streets that were made by the Romans. We will visit mainly the Christian quarter today, but we're also going to visit the Armenian quarter. So we're going back to the new gate. That's where we're going to start our tour. And that's the new gate. It was opened lately, only 130 years ago. It's just a hole in the wall. It's not a proper gate. So you just hole in the wall, just enter, and immediately you can see the shops of the old city. And the first thing you see, oh, and I'll just say something about the sign on the left. So the sign of the left is a new sign, but it's kind of imitating the signs that were made in Jerusalem during the British Mandate by Bezalel Art School. But during the British time, the order of the languages was different. So when you go to Jerusalem next time, look at the street signs, and the order of the languages in the sign indicate when it was made. In the British Mandate time, between 1920 and 1948, you always had the English, then the Arabic, and then the Hebrew. During the Jordanian time, you will find street signs with Arabic and English only. And sometimes the Hebrew was added on the top after 1967. And in the modern signs, you have Hebrew, Arabic, and English. So even the street signs tell you the story of the city. We will go through this gate and to the Christian quarter. That's the pink area. And the first thing we're going to see to the left is the headquarters of the Franciscans. So we will start with the Catholics. When we talk about the Catholics in the Holy Land, we have 2 main representatives of the Catholic Church. The first group of representatives of the Catholic Church in the Holy Lands are the Franciscans. This is the entrance to the monastery. The Franciscan Brothers came to the Holy Land in the 14th century. Actually, they were already Franciscan here in the 13th century. They just celebrated 800 years of presence in the Holy Land. But officially, they got the custody of the Holy Land. They got the responsibility to protect the holy places for the sake of the Catholics already in 1342. So they're Franciscan here since 1342, not the same Franciscan, of course, different brothers, but they're there in the holy places. They represent the Catholics in the holy places. They were leading the groups of the pilgrims. They built houses of prayer on the holy sites. They located the holy sites. Many sites disappeared between the different rulers here. Churches were demolished. Churches were not in use, and they located the holy places. They rebuilt the churches. They started to pray in the holy places. They did archaeological excavation, of course, later on, when in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and located and found the remnants of the ancient churches that were built over the holy places. So they were definitely protecting the holy places for the sake of the Catholic world. And this is the main church in their monastery that we're now visiting near the new gate. The monastery is called the Terra Santa, Holy Land. Actually, most of their institutions are called Terra Santa, Holy Land. And this is the main church. And it's a modern church. Actually, there was an old church there, and they kept expanding it, and that's the result from the 19th century. It's a bit tacky, it's a bit kitsch, a lot of colors that looks like marble, but it's not really marble, and the chandelier. And this church is used in the custody by the Franciscans on a daily basis, but it's also used by the local Catholic community. So the Franciscan come from all over the world. As you can see in the former picture, they're Franciscan from all over the world. They all come and serve here. And their common language would be the language of the Franciscan order, Italian. But when you come to the church and you have the Franciscan service, it would be in Italian. But if you come on Sunday morning to the service, when the parish comes to pray, the service of the Catholic, the Latin Catholic who come to pray here on Sunday morning will be, in what language would they pray? Arabic. Yeah, I can see that you're saying the right answer, Arabic. So you can find services here in Italian, in Arabic, the local parish will pray in Arabic. And actually, if you come on Saturday's afternoon, And you can also find services in Kannada and Konkani. These are languages of South India, because in Israel, we have many migrant workers who get together to pray in their mother tongue, which is neither Arabic nor Italian. So they hire the church for their services in their language, Kannada, Konkani, there are a couple of languages, and they pray. The parish of the migrant worker pray on Saturdays afternoon and Sunday around noontime. So this church served different people in different languages during the day. But this is not the only thing that the Franciscans are doing. They're also responsible for creating the parishes, the Catholic parishes in the Holy Land. Why do I say creating? Because there were no Catholics here before the Franciscan came here. The Catholics were in Europe. They came here during the Crusaders' time. They established a kingdom. They had beautiful castles. They built beautiful churches, but they left. And the Franciscan who came here in the 14th century opened schools, gave professional training. Like the people on the right, they're producing jewelries and artifact from mother of pearl and wood. So they give professional training. They built houses to give the young Christians opportunity to have their own house and build their own house. So slowly, people moved from other churches to the Catholic Church. And that's how the Latin Catholic community was developed. And today in Israel, we're talking about 25,000 Arab-speaking Catholic, Latin Catholic, who living in Israel and using the services of the Franciscans. So they take care of the parishes. They have schools. The first schools to be opened in the Holy Land was the Franciscan school in Bethlehem, the Terra Santa school. But today there are Terra Santa schools all over the country, serving not only Catholic kids, but also other Christian kids and Muslims. I will elaborate more about the schools later on. As I said, they have housing projects in order to strengthen the young generation and helping to stay in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land, because housing is very expensive. So they have different projects to support them. They still give professional training. Today, it's less craft and more high tech and computers. And of course, they do a lot of humanitarian work and social work with the community. So they start with taking care of the holy places, the holy stones, but then they move to take care of the living stones. And they said there's no priority. They're both very important for them. The stones, the holy places, and the living stones, the community. But just around the corner from the Franciscan, and I will give some time for questions in a second, I just finished with the Catholic, just around the corner from the Franciscan, in order to help them and support them, especially in the 19th century, there were many challenges in the 19th century, and in order to strengthen them, the Pope asked one of the archbishops, please pack your things and go to Jerusalem, and you will be the Archbishop of Jerusalem. And in order to, I always say to my student, to confuse us, and to confuse the local Christians, they also used the Greek title, the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem. So the Archbishop of Jerusalem is also, his official title is the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. And he represents the Pope in the Holy Land. And actually, he's also taking care of the Catholics. So he also taking care of the communities, and they have schools, and they have humanitarian project, and they have housing project. So there's a lot of support from the Catholic Church toward the local Christians. And they try not to be biased and support all the Christians, so not just the Catholic. So this is the current Patriarch of Jerusalem, Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzabella, who used to be the head of the Franciscans for 12 years, and then he was appointed as the Patriarch of Jerusalem. I guess the Pope realized that this guy knows how to handle things in Jerusalem, so he just left him in Jerusalem for another I don't know, who knows how many years, maybe until his retirement. So that was his installation ceremony. It was in October, still during the pandemic. So all the representatives of the churches were present there, with this beautiful vestments and the COVID masks. This is the church. This is the headquarters of the Patriarchate, just behind the Franciscan, with the flag of the Vatican. And this is the co-cathedral of the Most Holy Name of Jesus. And it's called co-cathedral. Cathedral is the seat of the bishop. But this is not the official seat of the the bishop, the official seat of the bishop, should be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's the most important church in Jerusalem. But if you've been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you know it's not so easy because of the status quo and the divisions in the church. We're going to talk about it toward the end of my presentation. And therefore, there is a co-cathedral, so the nearby cathedral where the Patriarch celebrates. So some questions before we continue.
Yeah, there weren't really any questions, just that a comment about the fact that there were other Hebrew-speaking Catholics, Catholic community in Israel.
Right. So there are different communities speaking in different languages. There are the migrant workers speaking in different languages. There are the Arabs. There are the clergy coming from all over the world. And since the 1950s, there's a small community of Hebrew-speaking Catholics. They have now 7 communities around the country. In Jerusalem, in Jaffa, in Migdal Emek, in Tiberia, in Beersheba. And they translated the Mass, the Catholic Mass, the Latin Mass to Hebrew, even before the Second Vatican Council. That's mean that before the Catholic Church allowed to pray in vernacular languages, in spoken languages, they were allowed to pray in their language. But just because they convinced the Pope, it's a holy language. It's sacred as, and if not more than Latin. So they were allowed to translate the prayers to Hebrew already in the 1950s, and they pray in Hebrew. And it's fascinating for Hebrew speakers to hear their service in Hebrew because they use a lot of formulas of the Hebrew prayers. So instead of just translating directly from the Latin, they use the Hebrew prayers, and it just, I'm so used to hear Catholic Mass in different languages, and it's always fascinating for me to hear that in Hebrew because that's the language I pray in the synagogue. So yes, so they're also Hebrew-speaking Catholic, but it's a tiny community. Yeah, I can see that you have that Rodrigo. I don't know your first name, but you have the prayers, the Siddur, the prayer book, and the songs in Hebrew, right? So they're a very good friend of mine, and I always recommend my students. I train the tour guides to go and experience the Hebrew-speaking service there. No, so it's an excellent question about. There's an excellent question about the authority. So, who's the boss, the Patriarch or the Franciscan? So both of them report to the Pope. So they're not subordinated to each other. The Pope is the one who appointing the Patriarch, and he reports directly to the Pope. And the Custos, the head of the Franciscan, reports to the head of the Franciscan order in Italy, and he reports to the Pope. So they are kind of parallel streams. They're not one above the other. And maybe I should mention, it's not part of our tour, but we should mention that also there is an apostolic delegator, there's a nuncio and this ambassador to the state of Israel, who is also a clergy, and he represents the Vatican as a state in Israel. So they're actually 3 different official representatives of the Catholic Church and another 99 different religious communities and religious orders of nuns and brothers and sisters and monks in the Holy Land. So there are quite many Catholic institutions in the Holy Land. But let's move on to other churches as well. Yeah. So from the Catholic Church, we're going to continue in the New Gate to St. Francis. We're going to pass to St. Dimitri, and we're going to get to the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. So if you were visiting Jerusalem, I don't know, 500 years ago in the 15th century, most of the Christians here probably were part of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem, the Greek Orthodox Church, is part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's a church with today 14 heads. So it's not a church with one boss, but 14, 9 patriarchs, 5 archbishops, each one responsible for a certain jurisdiction, for a certain region, but they're all in communion. And here I'm including the first 4, Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople. But then there are other 10, Russia, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Cyprus, Greece, Albania, Georgia, Czech Republic and Poland. Of course, these are Catholic countries, but they have a minority of Orthodox. And there is a big dispute about having the American Church and the Ukrainian Church as independent autocephalic communities as well. So each head is autocephalic, auto-independent, cephalic head. So they're independent heads, but they're all part of the same church. That means that if a Russian goes to a Bulgarian church, they can pray together even if they don't speak the same language. Here in Jerusalem, the language of the church is Greek, not from today, from the 1st century. That was the common language of this church. It was the imperial church all over the empire. So that was the common language. It's like saying the English Orthodox Church today, because that's the common language for most of the world. So back then it was Greek, and they all spoke Greek and they all prayed in Greek. And if you wanted to publish something that people would read it had to be in Greek. So they prayed in Greek, and therefore they were called the Greek Orthodox. The word Orthodox means the straight opinion, the straight way. So the Patriarch of Jerusalem is one of 14, but is a very important one because he holds the tomb of Jesus. So the flag to the right is the flag of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. They are the guardians of the tomb of Jesus. So you have two letters in the middle, Tav and Phi. That stands for Philikes, for Taphos Philikes, the guardian of the tomb. So that's the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, with all the respect to the Patriarch of Moscow, for example, who has many more people, many more parishioners, but he doesn't have the holy tomb of Jesus. So he's very important. He's very powerful. He has a lot of power because he's a very close friend with Putin, but he doesn't have the holy tomb. So the Patriarch of Jerusalem doesn't have many parishioners, but he has the holy places. And he is Greek, actually. The leadership of the church is actually coming from Greek origin. He actually speaks Greek. And the flag over his office would be the Greek flag. But again, if you go to the parishes, the people, the lay people, they are Arabs. They speak Arabic. They will pray the Orthodox service, the same service he does in Greek, they will do in Arabic. And maybe it's a good time to ask, since when do we talk about Arab Christians? Anyone?
Since the Muslim influence.
So I remind you, in the book of Acts, right? In the book of Acts, when they make a list of different languages that people are listening to the disciples speaking in tongues, one of them is Arab. So there were already people speaking Arabic in Jerusalem in the 1st century. But you're right, it's only from the 7th century that it became a common language. So since the 7th century, since the Arabs came from the Arab Peninsula and occupied quickly the Middle East, North Africa, all the way to Spain, the language of the empire, of the Muslim empire, was Arabic. So you could be Christian or Jewish or Muslim, but you spoke Arabic. So the Christians here, they speak Arabic. They used to be, they are part of the Greek Orthodox Church. They would call themselves Arab Orthodox because they don't pray in Greek. But the Patriarchate is called the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And it's quite interesting. Like, just try to imagine that. They're Arab, they're Palestinians. He's Greek. As a Greek Orthodox Patriarch, he has to keep good relations with all the states in his authority. So Israel, Palestinian authorities, and Jordan. He has to get along with the Palestinian Christian, the Jordanian Christian. He has to get along with the Greeks who support him. He has to get along with the Russians because they have a lot of power within the Orthodox Church. He's more a diplomat, juggling between these different interests, more than he's a spiritual person, because he's busy with just keeping good relations with everyone. So that's the Patriarch of Jerusalem to the right, and these are the clergy. You can recognize them with the beard, the black hat, and the black cassock, this gown that they're wearing. This is just a priest. This is a bishop. He has another extra gown in the back. They have over 23. They have 23 monasteries only in the old city. So wherever you go and you see either the Greek flag or the flag to the right, or you see a sign in Greek, something like that, it's a flag. It's a Greek Orthodox monastery only in the old city. They have more in the new city. This is, by the way, church where they keep a small piece of the skull of John the Baptist. And inside the church, this is not from the same church, but it's a good picture. You will always have the iconostasis. You will have a wall with icon that separate you, the audience, from the Holy of Holies, from the altar. And on the right of the gate, of the main gate, you will have the icon of Mary and the child. And on the other side, you will have Jesus and the Pentecrat, the king of the world at the time to come. And in the middle, the priest will run the service when he celebrates the liturgy. So he would not use this gate unless he's in the middle of the service and he's a priest. For any other purposes, they would use the side doors of this wall of icon. And on the top, we have either the life of Jesus or the apostles. You will not have seats. You will have to stand during the service because it is not a restaurant or cafe. You're supposed to stand while respecting God. But if you're really, really, really tired, you have these very uncomfortable seats on the sides. And usually when people come, they will light candles. They will light candles in front of the iconostasis, in front of the altar. So this is a typical Greek Orthodox church. And just behind the main monastery where the patriarch sits, there's also a school. So again, even the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate takes care of the parish, of the parishioner, of the families. So they have a school, San Dimitri school, and again, the kids are Muslim and Christians. The teachers are usually Christians. The principal are either clergy or lay people. They follow the curriculum of the Ministry of Education. They hardly learn any religious studies, nor Islam, nor Christianity. But of course, they have Christmas atmosphere. So everyone gets Christmas presents. It's interesting because in Israel, the Christian schools like the Terra Santa School or San Dimitri School, there are tens of Christian schools that take care of tens of thousands of kids in Israel. Most of them, except for 4, teach in Arabic. They follow the curriculum of the Ministry of Education, the Israeli Ministry of Education, and they don't have any religious studies. So, I mean, you can graduate from Christian school and you actually don't know anything about your own religion or other religions. You just do a lot of math and science and history of the Arab world and literature, but very little religion in these schools. And of course, as I said, everything is in Arabic. So we'll continue. Okay. So on the way, we'll do some shopping. And we can buy candles, the 33 candles, that's the age of Jesus when he was crucified, or some incense, or this very nice kit with holy water from the Jordan River, holy incense from Jerusalem, some oil from Bethlehem, and salt from Jerusalem, stone from Jerusalem, or even the crown of thorns. Shopping is very important in our tour. And we will continue toward the Coptic monastery of St. George. And I will say something about the Coptic Church. So the Coptic Church is, again, very old church based in Egypt. And the word Coptic is a representation of the Greek word Aegyptus, which means the palace of Ptah, an ancient Egyptian deity. And the Egyptians were called Egyptians by the Greeks, and the Egyptian Christian adopted this word, and it was Arabinized, and today you will hear them saying Coptic. And the Coptic Church has a small community in Israel, and they have, of course, clergy, they have a bishop, and they have priests, and they also have a big monastery near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Most of the Coptic community, not the clergy come from Egypt, but the lay people, they came to the Holy Land when Israel and Egypt were under the same rulers. So they came to work here. So for example, in the 19th century, they came to work in Jaffa, or during the Mandate time, they came to work in the Holy Land and stayed. We're going to talk afterward about the relations between them and the state and the different between them and the other religious communities. But I just want to go quickly over the different communities and continue to now the Armenian Quarter. So Armenian Quarter, why do Armenians have their own quarter? They belong to a different religion, or it's all Christian? So yes, of course, the Armenians are Christians, and they happen to live a bit far from the other Christians. And there's a big monastery there. So everyone called the neighborhood of the Armenians. But actually, just another Christian denomination. This is the entrance to the Armenian monastery. And the Armenian are quite special because unlike other religious communities that would see themselves as religious community, the Armenian would see themselves not just as a religious community, as a church, as a denomination, but they would see themselves as people. They would say, we are the Armenian people. We were established as people near Mount Ararat in Turkey. So the hat looks like the top of Mount Ararat. And we were the first people to adopt Christianity as a state religion. So in the 4th century, they had a little kingdom in the Caucasus area, and their king converted to Christianity, and all the Armenian converted as well. So they're very proud to be the first people to adopt Christianity as people. And that was in 301, when Christians around the Roman Empire were still persecuted, before Christianity became a legal religion. So they're very proud of being the first people to have a church, a state church. They're also very proud that they invented the Armenian characters, in the beginning of the 5th century. They use it until today. And they're very proud of their church, the Cathedral, St. James Cathedral, in the heart of the Armenian Quarter, where they have the relics of St. James, the brother of Jesus, and the head of St. James, the apostles. And this church was built in the 12th century. It has no electric light, only natural light and candles. And it's all covered with tiles of ceramic that were brought from Turkey many years ago, and a lot of icons. And before I'm opening for questions, when you walk through the Armenian Quarter, you will see many indications for the Armenian Genocide. So Armenian who lived in the eastern part of the Ottoman Empire, today's Turkey, during the Armenian Genocide, they were expelled from their region. And the Armenian talk about 1.5 million Armenians that were killed during the war in what they call the genocide. And many of them came as refugees to the border with Syria, and about 8,000 of them came to Jerusalem as refugees. So the majority of the lay people of the Armenian community are actually descendants of the refugees who arrived in Jerusalem in the beginning of the 20th century. So they put the maps of the Armenian Genocide around the quarter, and they have this new monument that was exposed just lately. They made a new fence, and now you can see this monument in the memory of the victims of the Armenian Genocide. They came from 6 different regions in Eastern Turkey. So each one is dedicated to another region, and then the central one is dedicated to all the Armenian victims. Before we continue to the other churches, maybe I will open the floor for questions. So yes, of course, Mal, you will see that they're also responsible for the holy places. So it's very confusing. So we got the Franciscan, we got the Greek Orthodox, and you got the Armenian, and yes, they're all protecting the holy places. Someone else want to ask before I continue?
No, we can move on. That's fine. And we can open it up at the end.
I will answer your question, Lisa, afterward. Okay. So from the Armenian, we will go toward the Syriac. The Syriac Church. Can you recognize the language?
Oh, this is fascinating.
Yeah, I see who has been there. So this is Aramaic. The Syriac Church is using the Aramaic as their language of prayer. This is Abuna Bulus. He writes in Aramaic, and he wrote a manuscript of the Gospels in Aramaic, so they can use it in church. They only use handwritten Gospels to read during the liturgy. And they don't speak Arabic on a daily basis, but they try to preserve the Aramaic as the language of their prayer. They try to teach the lay people as well the Aramaic language. But on a daily basis, they're speaking Arabic. So the Syriac Church is another independent church who has their headquarters near the Armenian Quarter. And this is their monastery, and this is their church. The altars.
If I can ask one question?
Yes, please.
The Syrians that we have in the old city, we do have Syrians in other parts of the country beside of those in the old city?
The Syriac Christian we have in Bethlehem.
Bethlehem, okay.
Couple of years, yeah, it's only in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Actually, a couple of years ago, the winner of the Arab Voice, you know, the like American, how do you say?
Idol, American Idol.
Arab Idol, sorry. I confused with all the Arab Idol.
Arab Idol. Okay.
Was a Syriac Christian from Bethlehem.
Oh.
So it was a great pride for the Christians in Bethlehem, and especially for the Syriac community. So this is their church, the little church. If you've been to the Holy Land and you visited the room of the Last Supper on Mount Zion, the Syriac Christian would say, well, you've been to the wrong place. We actually have the right place of the Last Supper. And they said at their church, just beneath their church, you can find the room of the Last Supper and the Pentecost. And the house of Mark, where Peter escaped from, when he escaped from the prison, he was released by the angel in the book of Acts and escaped from the prison. He got to that house. And they have an inscription in Aramaic that says that this was the house of Mark. And this was the place where they gathered, and that's where they had the Last Supper. But this is not very old inscription. They believe it's a very old one, but scholars not always agree with what the churches say. But it's Aramaic for sure. So, and now we're getting to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the reason why I come here toward the end of my presentation is because that's where all the Christians get together. Because the different Christians, the different denominations, they have their churches, they have their monasteries. You meet each other on the street, but there's one place where they have to get along together. And that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And originally it was a very impressive church, very big, very spacious, but today it's not, it's smaller. It's kind of squeezed between the other buildings of Jerusalem. It went through many changes. Basically, we see a building only from the 12th century today. But what's interesting about the building, it's not, and for me at least, it's not the archaeology, it's not the architecture. What interests me in the church is how all these different churches worshiping in the same place, and sometimes at the same time, but not together. So there are 5 different communities in the church: the Coptic, the Syriac, the Franciscan, the Orthodox, and the Armenians. And the keys are in the hand of 2 Muslim families. One family has the key and the other one opens and closes the door of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I'm not talking today about the history of the church. Probably you had a lecture about it. I'm sure Itamar did something amazing about that, but I'm just, in the context of the different communities. But what happened is that in this church, they all have to live together. They share the space, not because they like it and not because they wanted it to be like that, but because they kind of pushed into this situation by the Muslim authorities already in the 13th century. And it was fixed, and now you cannot change it since the 19th century. So the different colors indicate different communities holding different parts of the church. So you were right, Mal. The Armenians are the guardian of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Greek Orthodox also the guardian of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Franciscans. Each one has its own share. But the most important part of the church, like the tomb itself, is shared by 3 communities together. So it's not that you have to live one next to the other, but you have to follow a schedule that you all share the same place, but you have scheduled who can pray where and when, who can clean where and when, and who can renovate where and when. Just notice columns 5 and column 15. 1/4 of column 15 is Greek Orthodox and 3/4 is Armenian. 1/4 of column 5 is Greek Orthodox, 3/4 is Catholic. And then you have the Ethiopians on the roof. And I'm just skipping that. And just to make things more complicated, and that's where the question of where Israel enters, the holiest place for the Christian world, with 5 different communities sharing it, and one community on the roof, the Ethiopians, and the responsibility for maintaining the safety and the security of the visitors and the worshippers is on the Israeli police. And it doesn't matter if the policeman is Jewish, like this guy, I think he's also Jewish, or Christian, or Muslim, or even Druze, but they represent the Israeli police. And here we come to the question of relations with the state. When the churches here look at the state of Israel, for them is another ruler. There have been so many rulers here. There were Muslims, there were British, there were Jordanian, and now the Israelis. They have wider perspective. I mean, they measure in centuries, but they know that they have to get along with the local authorities. And therefore, they always have to juggle between the different interests. So the churches have different interests than the lay people. If we talk about the churches, they have to get along with the Israeli authorities because they have to get services from the state, because they have to get the visas from the state, because they have to get the protection of the policemen during religious services. So there's a lot of coordination with the police. Talking about Easter coming soon. So unfortunately, this Easter, the city will be empty. But if you've been to Jerusalem during normal Easters, when there is no pandemic, there is no COVID, the city is packed with pilgrims. And not just and in this year, there'll be twice Easter. So we'll have Easter in the beginning of April, but we're going to have another Easter, according to the Julian calendar, it will be in the beginning of May. So that means that you have 1 month before, 40 days during Lent, you already have a lot of people coming in, and then 50 days after Easter, so until Pentecost. So you have 90 days. The city is packed with people, and this year it will be 90 days and another 50 days because it will be a month later. And the police have to handle it, and the Israeli authorities have to handle it. So the churches need the Israeli authorities' support in order to maintain the ceremonies and the processions, and to keep everyone safe. So there's a lot of coordination around that. But even on a daily basis, they have to coordinate with the authorities. When it comes to and that's true for all the Christians. And maybe I'll say something about the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzabella. He was first a custos. He was the head of the Franciscan for many years. Now he's still a Franciscan, but he's not responsible for them. He's the head of the Patriarchate. And he studied in the Hebrew University, and he made many friends, many Jewish friends. And he kind of opened the church, the Catholic Church, to work with Israelis. And that's very influential because there's much more coordination now with the state. When it comes to the lay people, here they don't always understand. We have to remember that the lay people, and I'm talking about the Arab Christians, we're in a situation of conflict. So within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they're in the Palestinian side, even if they don't like what some Palestinians are doing or how the Palestinian Authority runs the conflict, but they're Arabs, and sometimes there's more tension with the Israeli authorities than you will find with the churches. And one example again around Easter time. When you have a lot of people coming to the church to celebrate Easter, and I'm just going to show you a picture of a very quiet day in the church. Look at the line of people standing in order to get to the tomb of Jesus. This is a line of about, 2 hours. I don't know how long it is because we see only part of the line. But, just imagine with this place very crowded and when there's no emergency exit to the church. So there's only one door to the church. And the police try to navigate the pilgrims that not too many people would get into the church. And the clergy who work in the church and know how sensitive it is, they understand why the police try to limit the number of people who try to get to the church. But for the person who comes to visit the church, especially for the Palestinian who finally got a permit to get from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, and he wants to get to the church for the Easter celebration, and he's being stopped by policemen because it's too crowded there and it's risky to allow more people into the church. this guy, this young person, or this person from Bethlehem, he doesn't care what's going on inside the church, and he doesn't understand why the policeman stops people from walking toward the church. For him, it's a violation of his freedom of religion. And you know, it's a lose-lose situation. I mean, it's a very sensitive situation. He doesn't understand the police. Sometimes the policemen don't have the time to explain him what's the situation, and he feels that his religious rights were violated, although it's only because the police really tried to keep the place safe. So there's a lot of there could be many places and points of tension between the authorities and the Christians, especially around around the holy days and around the holy places. So it's a very sensitive situation. And then I just like a quote from an Arab, I'm not sure if she's from Lebanon, reporter for the New York Times, and I just love the way she wrote it. So Dia Hadid wrote, "Another day, a line of Indian Muslims squished against South Korean tourists, Indian nuns, and Arab American Christians stretched past the chapel of the Copts, a room attached to the back of the attic where a monk guarding the site was engrossed in his smartphone." And that's really the reality of the church. And you have all these people trying to get to the church. So with this, you know, with the different denomination that we talked about, but then at the end, they're all squeezed one after the other, trying to get to the tomb of Christ. And I always tell the tourists that I guide, when you visit the church, again, don't just look at the stones, look at the living stones, look at the people there. See how multicultural it is. I mean, you come to see God, but you actually see people. You see people standing in different ways in the line to get to the tomb. You see people behave in different ways. People speak different languages. People express their faith in different ways. Some needs to touch, some want to kiss, some needs to sing. And it's quite an amazing experience to be able to see this multicultural environment that is possible only thanks to the fact that, unfortunately for the local denominations, the church is divided between 5 different communities. And after this exhausting, multicultural, very colorful experience, we will go into one of the Protestant churches in Jerusalem, where we can breathe. It's more peaceful. It's always quiet. The walls are not covered with icons or statues. You can usually see the plain stone. And there you will have services again in different languages according to the different communities that pray there, but there's more peaceful and more Western atmosphere. And a lot of people like to go to the Lutheran Church nearby, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or to the Anglican Church, the Cathedral of St. George, or the Scottish Church of St. Andrew. But there are other Protestant churches around the city. I think these are the most impressive one. Where you kind of peacefully come down and enjoy the quietness after the hustling and bustling atmosphere of the city. Before I continue, if there are other questions, because I would like to talk a little bit about other Christians in Israel. So yeah, I'm just going to answer the Syriac, this is from the question. The Jacobite are the Syriac Church. Yes, they're called Jacobite because in the 5th century, they were organized by a bishop, actually. He became a bishop, who is called Jacob. So they're called Jacobite. So it's the same church. And actually, they're originally from, the majority of them were in Syria, Iraq. Now, many of them are in Germany and in Sweden. And as I said, small community here. There's also Christ Church, right? It's also a beautiful church. Yeah. It's actually the first Protestant church near Jaffa Gate. You're absolutely right. The Syriac were the one who took who found the first Dead Sea Scroll, were purchased by to the Syriac bishop who brought it to the US. Maybe something, and maybe if there are any questions, if not, I can have another few minutes, or what's?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there are any questions?
No, there aren't. I think
Okay.
go on and talk about the relationship.
Okay. So now we talked about the traditional churches. We talked about the Christians who have a long presence here, clergy, lay people, they have schools, they have houses, they have their communities. But actually, we also have new Christians in Israel, and they would not fit necessarily to the cultural background I presented. They're not Arab Christian, they're not clergy. They're not even counted in Israel as Christian, either because they're not counted as Christian or because they're not citizens and they're not counted as Israelis. I'm talking about 30 to 150,000 people who immigrated from the former Soviet Union countries, people who came based on the law of return that allow every person who has a Jewish mother, Jewish father, grandfather, or grandmother to immigrate to Israel, and everyone who is married to a Jew to immigrate to Israel. And out of the over 1 million people who came from the former Soviet Union countries, about 380,000 are not Jewish according to the Orthodox Jewish law. So they can immigrate to Israel, get citizenship, but they do not register as Jews. And in Israel, we don't have separation of state and religion. Therefore, your religion is registered by the state. It's only relevant for marriage, divorce, and burial. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter what is your religion. And your religion is not necessarily connected to your faith, but it's connected to either your mother or father. And in the case of the migrant worker from the Soviet Union countries, when they came here, if they had a Jewish mother, they were registered as Jews by the state. And if they didn't have a Jewish mother, but a Jewish father, for example, according to the Jewish Orthodox law, they're not considered to be Jewish. So they could not be registered as Jews, but they could register with no religion. Some asked to be registered as Christian. That was possible. But those who were registered, who didn't want to be Christian because they felt Jewish or because they just felt nothing, after 80 years of communism, some people felt having no religion. So they registered with no religion. So today we have 380,000 people with no religion in Israel, which is strange because, again, it has nothing to do with their faith. It's something technical that how the state wrote them when they immigrated to Israel. I could be totally atheist and eat pork with cream on Yom Kippur, which is like the worst thing a Jew can do. And still, I'm registered as a Jew and I'm considered to be a Jew. But I know also Christians who don't believe in God, who were not baptized, and they're registered as Christian because their father is Christian. Or I know Muslim who don't believe in God and eat pork and drink wine during Ramadan, which is like the worst thing you can do as a Muslim, and they're still Muslim. So it's not a matter of faith or practice, but it's a matter of registration. And many of these people who came from the former Soviet Union countries, they actually feel very Christian. They go to church, the Catholic Church, the Russian Church, Messianic Jewish community, it depends. And they're very Christian according to their faith. And they speak Hebrew, they go to Hebrew speaking school, they get Hebrew education, they celebrate the Jewish holidays, but also the Christian holidays. So we don't know exactly how many of these people are actually practicing Christians, but quite many, tens of thousands for sure. And especially during this time of the year, when you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and there are no tourists, and you can recognize the Arab Christians because they speak Arabic, you can recognize the Israeli, Russian, Christian Jews. Why do I call them like that? Because they're Israelis. They're originally from Russia, so sometimes they speak Russian. They're Christian in their faith, but they're Jews in their culture because they also celebrate all the Jewish holidays. So they will celebrate Passover, but they also celebrate Easter. So this is quite a big group of Christians in Israel. And we have 70 to 80,000 migrant workers from Catholic countries, mainly Catholic, some from Orthodox countries. So South India, Philippines, Sri Lanka. And they're also, they're not Israelis, they're temporary in Israeli, but they could live here for many, many years. And just to show you their cultural life. So they're also practicing their faith on Saturdays because Sundays they have to go to work. So they have celebration on Saturdays in their languages. As I mentioned in the Catholic Church, they have kids. If they have kids, they send them to the public school, and the public school is usually Hebrew school. So the kids get Hebrew education, Jewish education, they learn Jewish history, they learn about the Jewish holidays. And on Saturday, the mother takes them to church to teach them something about their own faith. So then they have Sunday school on Saturday where they do catechism of the Catholic Church. They actually have activities during Jewish holidays because the parents have to work. So they have kind of camps, and they have to produce catechism text in order to teach them their own faith, but in Hebrew. So we're talking about kids who speak Hebrew, who grew up here, who are originally Filipinos or Indians, and they go to Hebrew school, they get Jewish education, and then on Saturdays and weekends, they get Christian Catholic education, and they're part of the Catholic Hebrew-speaking community. And we also have asylum seekers from Eritrea, from other countries in Africa, and they're also Christians, and they have their own churches, and they have their own places where they gather to pray, and they have their own families, and they send the kids also to Hebrew-speaking schools because that's where they live, in Hebrew-speaking environment. And they also try to give their children Christian education on Saturday because on Sunday the kids have to go to school. And they also teach them about their own church, which is the Eritrean Church, which is one of Oriental churches and have their own very special tradition. It's similar to the Ethiopian Church. So when we talk about the Christians here, we get quite mixed community of, on one hand, Arab Christians, on the other hand, clergy coming from all over the world. And then we have the Russian Israeli Christian Jews, Christians who came from Russia, and they're Israelis and they're part of the Jewish community. We have the migrant worker, we have the asylum seekers, and it's all mixed together. So, and I think the best place to see that is in Jerusalem, because especially during the holidays, the coming Easter, the next Easter, they all want to celebrate it in Jerusalem. And the advantage for them this year is that the city will not be very crowded with tourists. So there will be more space for the local Christians who want to be in the holy places. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe I'll stop here and see if there are questions, or if you want to open a discussion.
Yeah, I would like to ask Hana. Thank you very much. It was obviously, I know it's a lot of information to pack into an hour and 5 minutes, but I really appreciate it. So thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Christian communities being a minority in Israel? Maybe go a little deeper. How do they feel? They have dual loyalties. Maybe break it up between Arab.
Okay, so it depends who asks, why do you ask, where do you ask, when do you ask? It's a very sensitive question because, and I will talk about the Arab Christians, and I call the Arab Christian Palestinian Christian citizens of Israel, or Palestinian Christian living in the West Bank. We have, they're very pragmatic. So as minority within a minority, they know how to be a minority. They've done that for many years. They actually have done that since the 7th century. They're a minority here for 1300 years. And they know how, that in order to survive, you have to protect yourself, and by avoiding going into conflict. And therefore they try to do, they practice it still. So either it's the Mamluks or the Ottomans or the British or the Jordanian, now the Israelis, they try to avoid having conflict, try to live their life. The most important goal for them is that their kids will be lawyers or doctors, just like other minorities in other parts of the world, and they will have enough money to go to their yearly vacation. They have a problem of emigration, people moving out. A lot of young people emigrate outside the Holy Land because it's just easier to be nobody, not to be part of a conflict, not to be labeled. So many immigrate to more safer and quieter places.
Okay, but Hana, is that when you say many
state? But basically, I think they would say now this is where we live. We want to get along. If they would be involved in politics, it would be in a very minor way, more in politics, in more dialogue with other communities outside of Israel, but they would be very pragmatic in their relation with the state. So I don't know if that you related to this or you wanted me to talk about something else.
Well, you did bring up one interesting point, and that is when you talked about immigration, I had always read that, yes, there is immigration out of the Holy Land for some, percentage of Christians over the years. But and again, I don't know if this is just propaganda, but if you looked at in Israel proper, within the boundaries of what is Israel, excluding the West Bank, that actually it has remained consistent. But I don't know if that's, the immigration has occurred in the Palestinian areas. I'm not sure if it's true, but.
So it's true that the number are stable, but the number of Christians is stable, but the number of Jews, their percentage in the population is going down because the Jewish and the Muslim communities are growing. There is immigration, not as high as in the West Bank, but there is immigration. I don't know a family that have no one who immigrated outside of Israel. Every family I know at least have one child. So they have 2 or 3 kids. One is always outside the country. There's always an uncle or aunt outside the country. I think it's a propaganda to say that Israel is the safest place for Christians in the Middle East, because I feel embarrassed to be compared to other countries in the Middle East. I would be prepared to be compared to European or America and not to Syria or Lebanon. It's easy to compete with them, talking about being democratic and taking care of minorities. But I think the problem is that we live in a conflict, and in this conflict, the Arab Christians are Arab. And I think one of their, and when when you take the bus and you speak on the phone in Arabic, and people don't know if you're Christian or Muslim, if you're a threat or not, Jews look at you with suspicion, because there is a lot of suspicion between Arab and Jews in Israel, unfortunately. Carrying 100 years of conflict, and they're categorized as Arabs. So when they get to the airport, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian Arab or Muslim Arab, but you're being Christians. But when I get to the airport, they don't ask me anything. And when the state-nation law that was published just 2 years ago, I think it was another crisis for them, because they thought that, okay, Israel is going into a more secular, liberal direction. There will be, minorities, but they have, equal rights. Everything is equal. Israel is a democratic state. And they were disappointed to discover that the nation-state law differentiate between Arab and Jews, and Arab villages and Jewish villages. And so they really, really want to get along. They really want to stay. They really want to be pragmatic and have a normal, good life. And although the head of the churches try to encourage them to stay, but a lot of young people say, here it will be hard for me to find a Christian partner, a spouse. It will be hard for me to get a job. I'm always labeled as Arab. So, I'm just going to leave. So the numbers are stable. But I think for the communities, the optimal thing, the ideal thing would be that the number would grow and not stay stable. So that's the issue. So you can play with the numbers and come up with the conclusion you want. And of course, activists Palestinian activists who want to use this against Israel would say, well, the immigration is only because of the occupation and the way Israel treated Palestinians. And there's no one truth. It's always a mixture of things. It's, the situation, it's the conflict, it's the economical situation. There's so many things, so many elements that cause a young person to pack his things to move to another country, just like, also Jews do.
I guess I would also just want to point out too, because you have the law of return, that generally speaking, Jews are allowed to immigrate to Israel. And unless you've got a situation like with Russia, which has people like, the grandfather was Jewish or something like that, Christians don't have that right. So just off the bat, you're going to have your percentages rising as a percentage of the entire population, and another community declining over time. Right.
And law of return is and the question of what does it mean to be a Jewish democratic state? It goes back to the basic definition of what is this state and what's the place of minorities in the state. Right. And I think that's something that we still struggle in Israel. It's a very interesting discussion now, also with the new decision, or not new, but decision of the Supreme Court to recognize conversion done by liberal movement in the US. It's part of the discussion of who is a Jew and what does it mean to have a Jewish democratic state. Even now, with closing the borders, who is allowed to come to Israel and who is not? Who would be left outside and who would be able to use the airport and come to Israel? These are the questions that this state is struggling with for the last 73 years. So and I think it's still a struggle. We're still trying to understand, not always in the way I would think we're not necessarily going in the right direction, but we're still struggling with this.
Well, I want to see if anybody else has questions. And I also, before you guys all perk up with the questions, I just want to remind you of two things. One, next week is David Nekrutman, who's the executive director of the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation. Some of you may have heard him last year when he spoke about the 4 cups of wine and redemption. It's an intro to Passover, and with a focus on the 4 cups of wine and what is the meaning of redemption for Jews and Christians. So that should be a very interesting discussion. I hope you'll all join and tell your friends. And that's next Sunday. And then the Sunday after, we have a program on about Easter. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that next week. And of course, I just want to also encourage you, if you enjoyed the program, to please think about supporting our efforts. You can see the link behind me, https paypal.me/Traveluia. So it's always wonderful to be able to, tip our speaker and to support the program, because obviously we run a very small program, and this does cost money to bring, quality people and quality tour guides on. So whatever you can do, if you want to leave a little something like you would do if you were actually traveling and giving a guide each day a tip, we'd certainly appreciate it. So think about that. And I just, again, want to thank you all for joining. Any questions for Hana?
I'm here for questions.
Susan, Mel, Walt, Donna, please. Scott, anybody? I know we covered a lot of information, and nothing is off the table. You don't have to feel like you're on the, like you're going to offend anybody. We've heard it all. And if we haven't heard it, we're okay to hear it. So
I'll jump in. Am I muted? Yeah. I was having a sidebar chat with Itamar about the topic of the fact that Hana mentioned everybody had to be registered as some kind of religion when they came into the country. And so I told Itamar in a sidebar chat, I don't like that. And he told me that's the way it is. You can't get married in a city hall.
But actually, it's a result. It's in a way it's similar to the situation in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the status quo. So, in the beginning of Zionism, in order to recruit the ultra-Orthodox to this Zionist project, they said, okay, we will go for that. We'll support you, they said, but only if you will allow us to observe the system that was used in the Ottoman Empire, that Jewish communities have independence in deciding about how to get married and how to get divorced, and to do that according to the Jewish halachic law, the Jewish law. In order to avoid mixed marriages and to have control over who marries with whom. So they got, so it's not that they make the decision, it's just maintain the situation as it was in the Ottoman time. And that's how it is. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people don't like the fact that they're obliged to get married through the religious authorities. And you know what? The problem is not getting married, because you can always get married in another country and be registered here. It's a bit strange that you have to make this procedure in another country. But if it's a mixed marriages, or someone who has no religion, he cannot get married in Israel. So he has to go to another country. But, you can also live together as a couple and not get married, and you will get all the rights as a married couple, even gay couple. But the problem is when you want to get divorced, because we don't have civil divorce. And then when the case comes to the family court, to the civil court, they first have to make sure that there is no other religious court that has the authority to judge in this case. So for example, if it's a Jewish couple, but they got married in another country and registered in Israel, they didn't have a religious marriage. They had no rabbi in their marriage, but they're Jews. The civil court cannot divorce them. They will have to go to the rabbinical court to get the get, their divorce. And the same thing for Catholics. So just imagine two Catholics, two Christians who happen to, to go and get married in the US, come back, registered in Israel as married, have nothing to do with the church. They don't care. They would never get communion. They don't want to baptize their children. Now they want to get divorced. And they realize that they both registered as Catholic. And they stuck. They cannot get divorced. They cannot get annulment. They cannot get, they can just be separated. They will not be able to get married again in Israel. So it is complicated. It is very complicated. A lot of people would like to change it, but the power of the religious parties and the ultra-Orthodox parties in Israel who insist on that is still very strong, as you can see in every elections we have. And therefore,
in 2 weeks.
Situation.
As I said, we have an election in 2 weeks, and certainly there's a lot of discussion on the ground about who to vote for and what kind of a coalition could be put together that, might exclude the Orthodox that have, for many of us, I feel that that's been a real thorn in the side during this Corona, and I'm not going to get into that, but certainly, and some of these other issues that Hannah brought up, but that's been a real challenge in this last year. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is another challenge. Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we'll see if you remember everything I said.
Yeah, quiz everybody.
Quiz, yeah.
Well, I'll send you all, we're taping this, as you know, and I'm sure some of you might want to have the video to review it because you did present an awful lot of information. And like me, you also speak really fast. So I can, I hear fast, but I know it's great to be able to go over it because there's a lot of very pertinent information that you presented, and it's complicated. It's very complicated. So thank you all. I just want to kind of reiterate in the back of your heads, if anybody's thinking about coming in the next year or 2 years, or you're thinking about leading a group, it's not too early to start planning. We're not taking any deposits. We're just flowing and booking and hoping that things will open up in the next couple of months and slowly be able to plan for 22 and late 21. So if it's on your radar at all, feel free to email me, and we can get the conversation started and start planning. And we've used Hana a lot in different groups. I've had her speak. I've had her take many of the legislative groups like Congress people and others around when they come to the Old City. She's also come in and spoken to groups, in the hotel in the morning about different topics. You name it. We brought her in to kind of talk about Bethlehem, talk about Jerusalem, talk about, again, Christians in the Holy Land or any other type of dialogue related programs. And it's always a pleasure. So that is something special to be able to put into programs. And aside from that, again, I just want to thank you all for taking the time. Again, if you want to leave a little something, always appreciated. Obviously we haven't had work for almost a year. So, anything is very helpful, and love to be able to tip the guide as well. So thank you. Thank you all I hope you all have a pleasant week and a healthy week, and get sure I have vaccinations. It sounds like things are speeding up there a bit. That's what we hear, 10% going on in the United States right now, 10%. Yeah, shake your head if you've gotten vaccine, number one. Okay. Oh, that's more than 10% in this crowd. I'm so happy to see that. That's
such a great relief.
That's just great. That's great. Well, I hope it continues like that. So
thank you, Hannah.
Pleasure. Pleasure. Hope to see you in Jerusalem.
Ken, thank you.
Thank
you. Heathrow, everybody. See you next week.
Thanks. Enjoyed it a lot.
Great.
Very, very interesting.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.